Okay, so our project has been running for around 18 months. It's recently been published, which is fantastic. We've done some new primary research and also investigated more generally the economics of recycled water. The process that we've been through has involved a phenomenal amount of people across the industry. We've had forums and workshops and steering committees that have involved people all across Australia, and the level of input has been really pleasing, and the level of support now that the project has actually been finalised has also really been pleasing. So with that as a backdrop, the project challenge, as Dom just mentioned, recycled waters have historically been difficult for any one beneficiary to justify. There are a range of beneficiaries with recycled water, including water service providers, councils, developers, the customers, the community, the environment. Everybody's known there's this raft of different benefits and beneficiaries, but often it's assessed from a reasonably narrow commercial point of view, or a point of view of one particular region or one particular group. So because of this, they're often inappropriately estimated or poorly defined, even when they are done. And the ability to assess that economic viability varies widely across the industry. There are some large, well-funded organisations that do this sort of thing day in, day out, and there are very small organisations that struggle to find the funding just to get the recycled water scheme up and running, let alone putting a lot of research into the costs and benefits up front. But that's often a poor way to go about the process. We actually started this project off of the back of a developer, or more correctly a council industry group, that approached us and said, look, we've spent a lot of money trying to get this project up and running. We've researched all the options, we've spent money on engineering, we have this all ready to go, and right at the last minute we tried to find out how to pay for it, and nobody was putting their hand up. So we all thought it was a great idea, but it fell over $6 million later after spending all this money and all of the resources and team effort. And it was very disappointing for everybody involved not to understand the wider benefits right from the start. So this hopefully will help plug some of those gaps. That fourth point, that there are still significant gaps, even for the large well-funded organisations. There are some benefits to the community and to the customer that aren't very well understood in a quantitative sense, and therefore often are just described qualitatively, and that often doesn't pass, internal business cases or treasury checklists, for example. It was also quite clear that there was no defensible and industry accepted framework for economic assessment across the industry. So what we were hoping for was a better understanding and methods for addressing commercial and institutional impediments. We basically started out with the question, why aren't good projects getting up? And we tried to understand both from a commercial point of view, from a community point of view, and from an institutional point of view, if there were good projects not getting up, why they weren't getting up. We were also seeking for an industry-supported framework for economic assessment and pricing, and to do some new primary research to fill the existing knowledge gaps. So the deliverables. Essentially, we delivered 4 separate items, and these were done by, there's some technical reports which sit behind the main report, and which I'll talk with Don about, but I think we're certainly happy to release those reports. And they go into a little bit more depth about some of the background work that's gone into populating that. But we looked at a summary of the key commercial and institutional impediments and recommendations for the future based on that. We produced an economic viability assessment framework. We produced a pricing framework. And we conducted the new primary research into the value to recycled water users and the value to the community. Now, these were 2 fairly large new pieces of work that hadn't been done before, and provided some real insights into the extra value that's not normally captured through normal pricing arrangements and normal cost-benefit analysis. So I'll go into the results of those in a minute and describe what we did in a second. Okay, so this is the key results. This is probably where I'll spend most of my 15 minutes. So recommendations that we came out with were based on our discussions with industry. We had not only unstructured interviews with people, sorry Don, I think I've turned it off, unstructured interviews with people across the industry, informal discussions while we were doing our workshops and our presentations, but we also had some formal structured interviews with representatives. We picked regulators, we picked water businesses, we picked private sector participants, and we asked them what were the main impediments. And I think some of the work that Cynthia's done will show that there's been a vast array of very specific issues that facing the industry, and impediments and opportunities for different projects. So we were stepping back a little bit away from the detail and just asking in general terms, what can we do as an industry to help support you and help to improve the processes that are there at the moment. The main outcomes, you can read more in the document, but the main outcomes for us were definitely the cost effectiveness was raised as a critical issue time and time again. How do we show that these are cost effective, and are they always cost effective? But also the commercial risk, that one, and in particular the demand risk, and I think Cynthia's project bears this out as well. The demand risk has been such a critical problem for recycled water schemes in the past, and it's been a shame because we were going through a drought period. People were very keen to get these projects up and running. Sometimes the same level of rigour that might apply to a new small water supply or even a wastewater provision wasn't necessarily the same level of rigour and assessment that might have gone into the recycled water scheme. And sometimes it was just confusing because we didn't know. We were still new at it, and we didn't know what sort of demand was going to come out, whether that's industrial demand or residential demand or agricultural demand. All of those, and we've seen reasons why over the last 5 years that demand has shifted, and why with the return of rainfall, agriculture might use less water than it did before. With businesses, they come in and out of business, and the GFC certainly didn't help that. So we have a range of reasons. So estimating the demand risk is important, but also methods for capturing the risk and making sure that as a service provider, those people that were putting in the scheme weren't subject to the risk. That was highly important. So we've spent a little bit of time in the report capturing that, and I think some lessons also will come from Cynthia's reports as well. We also found that the process barriers, while the process barriers still existed, we heard the story that a lot of work has been done in the last 5 years, and a lot of the process has moved on, a lot of the regulations have moved on, people are a little more comfortable, but there still are barriers there, and particularly for the smaller players, they can find it confusing and hard and duplicated, and so we've made some recommendations that came out of those conversations about one-stop shops and the ability to streamline processes and give the small players in particular more information so that they can make their assessments and not have to rely on finding somebody who can answer the questions or tell them in the first place. And capital constraints, that's a final one. That's a practical issue which I think water businesses in particular have faced for a long time, and we don't have any magic bullet solutions to that one, but other than to continue working to see how you can spend money in a capital constrained environment. Now, the economic viability assessment framework, that's probably the cornerstone. It's a simple looking graph with words that you can't see at the moment, but it's a simple looking graph. It is in the report. If you have a copy of it, you can open up and have a look. But it actually represents the culmination of a lot of discussion. It's gone through about 20 different iterations, and there is a lot of behind the scenes discussion on each of those. But I will briefly go through those. So there's costs on the left-hand side, benefits on the right-hand side, and these are very generic. Again, we tried to narrow it down to the major costs and benefits to give one snapshot so that people could get their heads around it in one go and then talk about the detail behind that. So, we have the direct recycled water costs, which are fairly well known when a recycled water project gets up. The indirect costs, which are still often thought about but not always. What are the extra costs that you're going to have to incur to connect it to your wastewater system, to send bills out to customers, to all the practical things that need to get done, all the project management costs. There's quite a lot to be done in a recycled water scheme behind the scenes. Reticulation costs, again, because reticulation is often supplied by a developer, it's often a forgotten cost, but a lot of the participants in our forums didn't want us to forget about that. That's a community cost, and the developers didn't want us to forget that they're contributing something. They're contributing reticulation. So that is a substantial area that's often overlooked in analysis. And other environmental and community costs. Now, there are a range of those. Again, a lot of them very, very specific. We at different times had others in and out, but we decided to keep that fairly generic because most of them are reasonably specific to individual projects. And some of those extra costs, just to give a flavour, could include, for example, the downstream impact when you take water, recycled water, and use it for one purpose and don't put it, for example, into an inland waterway. It can happen sometimes that farmers, for example, downstream might see a reduced water load in the river and therefore might have their allocations affected. So that's an example, but there are many more. There are health, there are other environmental benefit costs, all sorts of things that can be taken into account there. On the benefit side, we talk about the value to the customers, and that is the value over and above potable water, because that's what it's usually replacing. And if there is no potable water, it's just the full value. The avoided wastewater costs, again, critically, avoided wastewater costs have been the main driver of successful schemes around Australia. Now, it's a fairly sweeping statement, but it's certainly the feedback that we got and certainly our own experience that where there's a wastewater problem, that's where the recycled water schemes help the most rather than a water supply solution. So it's an interesting distinction. Happy to debate and discuss that still. Avoided water costs. So again, during the drought, that was very important. Now it is still important, but some of the pressure has come off the water supply systems at the moment. The wider community willingness to pay, that was one of the major gaps that we did research for. Just these understanding that the community prefers recycled water rather than seeing water wasted, going out to the ocean. They prefer to see it used for a particular purpose, and they're prepared to pay for it. There's a lot of discussion to be had about willingness to pay and how you might include it. People's preferences change over time, how you ask the question, how you put it up against other options. So there's a lot of questions. Ours was a study to show in one particular case, which was Sydney, what the community might be prepared to pay against the default options. But again, every situation will be different, but we've given a demonstration, an indication that there is value and of what that value might be in this one particular case. And also other environmental and community benefits, which is the catch-all for everything that we've missed. And again, very specific. We usually find they're very specific and case by case, and you really do need to look at them case by case. But they might be, the benefits of greening your parks, or the benefits to ovals, or the environmental benefits if you are not putting some nutrients into waterways, but if the customers are using nutrient-filled water for some reason. We also came up with a pricing decision framework about how the prices would unfold, and as a subset of that, I have to always remind myself if they are cost-benefit justified, if they're not mandatory, and if they're commercially viable, then a framework for understanding how you might distribute the benefits amongst different organisations and maximise the chances that this thing gets funded and gets up and running. Our primary research indicated that, first of all, our hedonic pricing study, which was a review of customers in Rouse Hill to see what sort of benefit they see that they're getting, and we looked at that through house prices to see, in Rouse Hill it's a great example because there are almost houses across the road from each other where there is recycled water on one side and no recycled water on the other side. So it was actually a great case study, and we can go into depth about why that was a particularly good result. But we did find that there was a premium paid for properties that had recycled water attached to them. That was about $5,000 per property, or converts to about $3 a kilolitre. And we also did a choice modelling exercise which looked at the benefit to residents of the community, and in particular we were interested in those that didn't get the recycled water, although we asked everybody, but it was more broadly, even if you didn't get recycled water, would you like to see it used as a water supply or rather than alternative sources such as desalination? And we got a clear positive indication that yes, and depending on whether it's to the home, the environment, to councils or to business, and depending on the volume, we've got a range of different results from 45 cents to $3.80, again, all contained in the report. The audience and users, we definitely see this being fairly broadly applicable. I think that lists just about every interested party in the water sector, in the recycled water sector. Water service providers, private sector, local government, government planning and funding agencies, developers and economic regulators. I almost can't imagine a party that gets involved in recycled water that would have no interest in the economics of recycled water. So I hope that it is going to be used widely by everybody. The adoption plan, so far, we've had a number of highly visible public presentations. We've presented at Ozwater, we've presented at AWA, but basically whenever we get a chance, the National Water Recycling Conference, and whenever we get a chance to come and tell people about it, we've taken that opportunity and sent somebody along. WASA has also kindly hosted 2 breakfast sessions, one in Sydney, one in Melbourne for us, which has helped us to talk to the industry about this and got some good feedback from them as well. We have had feedback and information workshops in 5 capital cities around Australia, and again, they've been very well attended. We had some with 20 to 30, some with up to 60 people attending. So it just showed the level of interest and really good questions throughout it as well, which shows that people are actually engaged and interested in it. And we have an intention that some of the background papers we might publish some of the research that was done along the way, some of the academic research. Also propose, and I've heard the good news from Don that this is either looking positive or is good, that we are looking to develop a working model to evaluate new projects. So not just a report, but we were actually asked during our information and feedback sessions if we could produce a tool, something that people could actually physically work with to assess recycled water projects. And given that we've done a lot of these in the past for individual businesses, it's a great opportunity to consolidate all of that work and put it in one place so that we can actually help people to work through it, particularly the smaller organisations that don't have their own sort of templates for this sort of work. Finally, acknowledgements for the project. We would like to acknowledge the great work from the Project Advisory Committee. We relied on them quite a lot, and they gave some fantastic feedback throughout the process. It's the Centre of Excellence Advisory Committee. The ANU, one of our research partners, Jeff Bennett, helped us with the technical detail and to give us the QA throughout the process. Hunter Water provided funding, which was fantastic. Sydney Water provided quite a lot of in-kind support throughout the process, a lot of information and assistance throughout the way. Our steering committee, we had industry, government and regulators. We met several times to discuss with them the early stages, what we were going to do, whether it was a good idea and was in it, and at the late stages, some of the results, and also the many, many forum participants that we had along the way. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you very much.